On the afternoon of the 26th, quite a few Indians dressed up in 7th Cavalry coats taken from Custer's dead, some wore military hats, and at least one carried a guidon, so the renegade whites seen by Private Pym were not altogether imaginary. In spite of such macabre evidence before their eyes, the trapped men did not suspect what had happened. From the rifle pits they gazed at Sioux warriors wearing blue uniforms with yellow cavalry piping, they looked at the flag, and they asked each other why Custer had abandoned them. During this afternoon, a file of mounted Indians paused in the valley to contemplate the men on Reno Hill, and among their horses was a golden buckskin with distinctive white patches. The identity of these Indians has not been learned, but several troopers who had been with the 7th for a long time said this buckskin pony belonged to the Oglala war chief Crazy Horse, whose presence suggested that a final assault was near. Whoever they were, they dismounted and settled themselves in a circle for a smoke. It is said that they flashed signals with mirrors and gestured with feathered lances. Lances would indicate Cheyennes rather than Sioux. Nevertheless, it is conceivable that the man on the golden buckskin was Crazy Horse. Many Indians eventually came to regard this Oglala as their greatest chief, more important than Red Cloud or Sitting Bull. He was known as a man who walked through the village without speaking or noticing anybody. Sioux loved to dance and sing, but he never joined a dance, not even the sun dance, and nobody ever heard him sing. He was small, with a narrow face, and his eyes looked beyond things. Journalists liked to portray him as being utterly reckless in battle, but an Oglala who rode with him said this was not true. At critical moments, Crazy Horse would dismount before shooting. He is the only Indian I ever knew who did that often. He wanted to be sure that he hit what he aimed at. He didn't like to start a battle unless he had it all planned out in his head and knew he was going to win. This is what distinguished him from his younger brother, Little Hawk. Old men of the tribe thought Little Hawk would become greater than Crazy Horse, but Little Hawk was impetuous. He crossed the Platte on a raiding expedition and never came back. Sometime later, Crazy Horse went looking for his brother's body, which he found and buried. He never boasted about what he did, nor would he take part in the lamentation that traditionally followed the death of a friend or relative. When he was a boy, the adults often discovered him standing in the shadows listening to their conversation, and when he grew up he continued to listen. He attended very few councils. Even then he would not speak. He always listened. His father was an Oglala holy man. His mother came from a different tribe. Most scholars think she was a Brule, a sister of Chief Spotted Tail, although Dr. V.T. McGillicuddy said she was a mini-Conju of the Cheyenne River Sioux whose chief was Touch the Clouds. In either case, emigrants on the Oregon Trail frequently noticed a fair-skinned boy among the Sioux near Fort Laramie and thought he must be a captive white child. At this time nearly all of the Plains Indians were restless. One ugly experience with whites created the next. Some of the Blackfoot had been stealing various items from Fort McKenzie, and may also have stolen horses, so the manager, Francis Chardon, resolved to punish them. He greeted one party with a cannon blast. It has been alleged that Chardon's welcome killed about 30 Blackfoot, which probably is an exaggeration. The most detailed and reliable account seems to be that of a trader, Charles Larpenteur, known as Lumpy Neck because of a goiter. He was not present, but he talked to a Fort McKenzie clerk and was informed that these Indians had murdered an employee, a Negro by the name of Reese. This murder, not petty theft, caused Chardon to concoct his disastrous plan. Whatever the motive, Chardon enlisted one Alexander Harvey, who, wishing no better fun, agreed to take an important part. Harvey carried a bowie knife or dirk, the French word for which is dag. An old man named Berger also was enlisted. evidently because Chardon decided to let 3 Blackfoot chiefs into the stockade where they would be assassinated, after which the gates would swing open and the cannon would blast the crowd outside. Any survivors would of course run away, leaving the ground covered with buffalo robes, jewelry, beaded moccasins, everything they had brought to trade. Chardon's plan did not work because the Blackfoot leaders inside the stockade suspected treachery. 2 of them escaped, the other went down with a bullet in one leg. The cannon was quickly fired, killing 3, not 30, but wounding 2 others. Harvey rushed out of the fort and stabbed these wounded Indians. I was told he then licked the blood off the daggy and afterward made the squaws of the fort dance the scalp dance around the scalps. The Blackfoot stopped trading at Mackenzie and moved across the boundary into Canada, but they returned to attack the fort. They may have burned it. After so much time the reports are contradictory. One way or another, what had been a mutually profitable and agreeable relationship was destroyed. In Canada things were different. The Hudson's Bay Company, part of a smoothly functioning empire, understood how to live with Indians whereas the newly arrived, impatient, disorganized, aggressive Americans did not. They streamed westward, lacerating the earth. George Bent, a half-breed son of trader William Bent, mentions emigrant trains several miles long, the huge freight wagons with white canvas tops resembling ships at sea. Indians who watched these creaking trains approach every season, growing longer and longer, could foresee the result. Cottonwood groves where they had camped for generations began to diminish. Grass in the valleys was eaten down to the ground. With the 1849 gold rush came cholera. The Sioux and Cheyennes, closest to the emigrant road, suffered most, but the epidemic spread northward to the Blackfeet, southward into Kiowa and Comanche territory. Bent visited empty villages where he saw teepees full of bodies. In the summer of 1853 a longtime trader and recently appointed Indian agent, Thomas, Broken Hand, Fitzpatrick, traveled among the Cheyennes, Arapahos, and Sioux. They are in abject want of food half the year, and their reliance for that scanty supply, in the rapid decrease of the buffalo, is fast disappearing. Their women are pinched with want and their children constantly crying out with hunger. 1 year after that, when the boy who would become Crazy Horse was 12 or 13 years old, a Mormon's cow wandered close to a Sioux camp just east of Fort Laramie and a mini-conjure named High Forehead could not resist temptation. Whether he wanted the hide or hungered for a steak is the subject of learned disagreement, and Bent describes the animal as a lame ox straying near the road. George Hyde, a cautious scholar, says a Mormon was leading a lame or worn-out ox when it was shot, and he considers the Indians' behavior purely provocative. William Bordeaux, whose grandfather owned a nearby trading post, and who got the story of this incident from a great-aunt named Tripe, says that an emigrant party left a crippled ox by the wayside. Historian Donald J. Berthrong thinks High Forehead meant to kill the Mormon but hit the beast instead. In any case, Sioux tribal elders offered to pay reasonable damages, say $10 or a cow, maybe 2 cows. The facts are lost in a spiral of dust. What does seem clear is that a belligerent Irish lieutenant fresh from West Point, John Grattan, set out to arrest High Forehead. This was both illegal and stupid. It violated a provision of the 1851 Laramie Treaty which stipulated that Reds and Whites should punish their own malefactors, and it was stupid to send Grattan because the Sioux detested him. He was a familiar type. The apple-green egoist. On various occasions he had strutted around the post thrusting a fist at Indians, calling them cowards, warning them to look out. Beyond doubt Grattan wanted and expected trouble when he left the fort to go after High Forehead. "When I give the order," he told his men, "you may fire as you damned please." His posse included a sergeant, a corporal, 27 luckless troopers, and the frightened interpreter named Auguste Lucien, who was at least half drunk and who rode around shouting that all the Sioux were going to be killed and he, Auguste, pronounced "Wayus" by the Indians, he himself, Auguste, was going to eat their hearts. J.P. Dunn in Massacres of the Mountains says this wild bunch consisted of just 19 men. No matter. The crucial element was Grattan's artillery. A 12-pound field piece and a mountain howitzer. Precisely what happened will never be learned. There seems to have been a conference during which Wayus shouted additional insults. The soldiers leveled their guns. The Indians thought they were about to fire. A shot was heard by men watching from the flat roof of Bordeaux's trading post. More shots. Grattan let fly with the heavy stuff. William Bordeaux was told by Great-Aunt Tripe that the hired man, Dominic Bray, rode up a nearby knoll after the first shots were heard. Bray returned, at great speed, to report that the Sioux encampment was boiling. The trader himself and several other men, some of whom were married to squaws, hurried to the camp but arrived too late. Grattan's conference with the Sioux may have fallen apart because of an outrageous misunderstanding. He may have responded to some remark as an Indian would by exclaiming, "Hown, hown," meaning yes, all right, I agree, but the troopers thought he cried, "Now, now," and promptly opened fire. It sounds like a vaudeville skit. It sounds implausible, yet this is why there was no J Company in Custer's regiment. J, when spoken, may be misunderstood as A, and if clumsily written it looks like I. Well, when things quieted down, the drunk interpreter and every white skin except one lay dead. Private John Cuddy either escaped and managed to hide among some wild rose bushes, or he was protected by Indians who had wisely avoided the confrontation. William Bordeaux said his great-uncle, Swift Bear, found Cuddy in the bushes, bleeding so much that he had tried to plug the wounds with sagebrush. Swift Bear carried him to the trading post. Later he was carried to Fort Laramie where he died. As for Grattan, the Sioux terminated his visit with extreme prejudice in the form of 24 arrows, one arrow passing completely through his skull. His face must have been pounded to mush with rocks or clubs because he could be identified only by his pocket watch. The single Indian casualty was a Brule chief named Whirling Bear, Brave Bear, Conquering Bear, Bear that scatters enemies. He was shot in the back, presumably by Grattan or the drunk interpreter. As a result of all this, the Sioux came near slaughtering everybody at Bordeaux's trading post, but finally were bought off. Still enraged, they plundered an American Fur Company depot. Then, having had some experience with whites, they loaded their mortally wounded chief on a travois and fled north. Whirling Bear soon died. His ceremonially wrapped body was placed on a scaffold beside the Niobrara River close to the mouth of the Snake. Grattan's soldiers were buried on a plateau in extremely shallow graves, so shallow that a caravan of Mormons en route to the Promised Land about a month later observed cadaverous heads peeping through the sod. Eastern newspapers reported the treacherous massacre of a gallant young West Point lieutenant with all his men, and the public responded, as always, by clamoring for revenge. Nor did it take long for the bad judgment of Grattan and that of his superior, who had authorized the arrest of High Forehead, to be magically transformed. Their foolishness became a cunning redskin plot. The lame ox had been shot neither for its hide nor its succulent ribs, but in order to lure these brave soldiers out of the fort. An army inspector arrived. He recorded the testimony of witnesses, which testimony was forwarded, along with the inspector's conclusion. The time has now fully arrived for teaching these barbarians how to appreciate and respect the power, the justice, the generosity, and magnanimity of the United States. What this meant was that 2 generations of delicate but peaceful coexistence would be replaced by a generation of savagery. Arapahoes and Cheyennes who had nothing to do with Grattan's folly remained where they were, encamped near Fort Laramie. Although they had not participated, they were affected. The Cheyenne agent reported that on his next visit they behaved with great insolence, the sauciest Indians I have ever seen. They galloped around the corral, they fired shots overhead, They demanded that no more emigrants travel the Platte Road. They wanted $4,000 cash. They wanted the rest of their government annuity in guns and cartridges, and 1,000 white women for wives. Well, Crazy Horse, Curly as he was then known, had been so shocked by the explosive meeting at Fort Laramie that when his people fled north he left them somewhere along the way. He spent 3 days on a hilltop without food or sleep, hoping for supernatural guidance. He wedged pebbles between his toes and put rocks under his back so that he could stay awake while meditating upon this experience with whites. At last, weak and dizzy, he thought he saw his horse approach, carrying on its back a warrior who flourished no scalps, whose unbound hair hung below his waist and who wore a smooth brown pebble behind one ear. The warrior's body had been decorated with hail spots and a streak of lightning descended from his forehead to his chin. Bullets and arrows attacked him but fell away without touching him. A storm broke, yet he passed through unharmed. People clutched at him, trying to restrain him, but he rode through them with a red-backed hawk flying above his head. Curly did not reveal this manifestation to anybody until he was 16 and ready to become a warrior. From then on he painted white hail spots on his body and a red lightning bolt down one cheek before going into battle. He tied a brown pebble behind one ear, wore the red-backed hawk on his head, and threw a handful of dust, perhaps symbolic of the storm, across himself and his pony. Except for moccasins and breech cloth he rode naked. When he was about 18 he participated in a fight against some Arapahoes trapped on a rocky knoll. Several times he charged them. He killed 2 but unwisely scalped them, either forgetting or ignoring the fact that the warrior in his vision kept no scalps, and because in this respect he had violated the message of his presiding spirit, an arrow struck him in the leg. His bravery against these Arapahoes was celebrated, and in recognition of what he had done he received his father's name, Crazy Horse. His father, the Oglala Holy Man, thereafter called himself Worm. So runs the most creditable account of how Crazy Horse acquired that name. It has been said also that while taking a steam bath with his father and a war chief named Hump he grew dizzy and saw the apparition. When he told the older men about it they said he had seen a vision of himself. Then there is a popular legend that during his birth a wild pony galloped by his mother's lodge. If the first story is correct, as many historians believe, one might reasonably ask how his father got the name Crazy Horse. And once upon a time, no doubt, that question could have been answered. A few years after the fight with Arapahoes, a medicine man named Chips created a charm for the young warrior, a small white stone suspended from a thong. This thong probably was slung across one shoulder so that the magic stone nestled under his left arm. The charm was devised in 1862 or 1863, and after he began wearing it he was never again wounded, although a number of ponies were killed beneath him, strangely duplicating the luck of his blue-jacketed doppelganger, Custer. About this time one of Red Cloud's nieces, Black Buffalo Woman, was married to a violent man whose name usually is translated, No Water or No Face. He is said to have been a jealous husband, but young Crazy Horse, whose eyes looked beyond things, ignored such inconsequential matters. Stories of his involvement with the wife of No Water, No Face, have been told so many times that it becomes a palimpsest, erased, scraped, revised until the original truth cannot be perceived. William Bordeaux, whose information came from elderly relatives, said that Crazy Horse eloped with No Water's wife, as a way of getting even for some intra-tribal dispute. The infuriated husband caught up with them and fired a shot which grazed the cheek of Crazy Horse. The 2 men began wrestling but were separated by the famous 7-foot warrior, Touch the Clouds. At last, to avoid further trouble, Crazy Horse relinquished his prize. Or he might have fallen in love with her when she was single, because it is said that while he was on a raiding expedition in Crow territory she got married, perhaps at the urging of Red Cloud. When Crazy Horse returned and found out about this he went into his mother's lodge and did not emerge for several days. Then he visited Crow territory again, alone, and when he got back he flung 2 crow scalps to the dogs. He took no more scalps for the rest of his life. When he was a youth wild with excitement he scalped 2 Arapahoes, and 2 crows for some reason that cannot logically be understood. This is the consensus of scholars. However, Captain John Bourke of Crook's 3rd Cavalry states that he himself owned a shirt trimmed with scalps which had been the property of Crazy Horse. How many trophies dangled from it, Bourke does not say. This shirt, presumably the same, used to be on exhibit at the Fort Robinson Museum. Perhaps it did belong to the famous Oglala, although such vanity would not have been characteristic. At any rate, he was unable to forget Black Buffalo Woman. Finally, when she had 3 children, he showed how much he cared for her by giving a feast, whereupon she deposited her children with relatives, told her husband goodbye, and moved in with Crazy Horse. This was permissible. A Sioux woman could change her mind about husbands, and just as in other societies the jilted husband was expected to behave decently. No Water did not. He entered the lodge of the newlyweds while they were eating and he shot his rival in the jaw. The bullet was meant to catch Crazy Horse between the eyes, and a second bullet might have followed except for the presence of Touch the Clouds. No Water was rebuked for this assault because it was he, not Crazy Horse, who had violated Sioux tribal structure. He was therefore expected to apologize by offering a gift of ponies, which he did. His gift was accepted, so the feud should have ended. It did not. One day Crazy Horse attacked No Water. As a result, he himself was disgraced. Some very old Oglalas who had known the chief were interviewed by Eleanor Hinman in 1930. The account given by He Dog of this fight in the lodge and of what followed is the most detailed that exists. He Dog, narrating the story through interpreter John Kolhoff, said that Crazy Horse and Black Buffalo Woman were seated by the fire in a friend's lodge when No Water rushed in and cried, "I have come." Crazy Horse jumped up, reaching for a knife. No Water shot him beneath the left nostril. The bullet broke his upper jaw and he collapsed into the fire. No Water then left the tent and told his companions that he had killed Crazy Horse. No Water had been riding a fast mule when he came looking for revenge, but he did not ride away when he learned that his bullet had only wounded Crazy Horse. He disappeared. Friends of Crazy Horse tried to find him because they wanted to kill him. When they could not find him they killed his mule. After things had calmed down No Water sent Crazy Horse 2 very good ponies, a roan and a bay. They avoided each other until one day near the mouth of the Bighorn where both of them were hunting buffalo. No Water jumped on a buckskin belonging to somebody else and rode off as fast as he could. Crazy Horse chased him all the way to the Yellowstone. After such a narrow escape No Water went south to the Red Cloud Agency and stayed there with the Indians who loafed around. That was where he stayed during the war with the soldiers. Black Buffalo Woman had a 4th child, a light-haired girl, and He Dog said many people believed this child was the daughter of Crazy Horse, but it was never known for certain. So, one way or another, the fight between these 2 dangerous men concluded. Black Buffalo Woman may have gathered her children and returned to her husband. At least it is known she and Crazy Horse separated. As for Crazy Horse himself, the passion he felt may have given way to self-disgust. All in all it had been a messy business. When he was about 26 he married Black Shawl or Black Robe, not with much enthusiasm. His parents might have arranged it. They lived together and had a daughter. Then Black Shawl developed tuberculosis, which was a common disease, and after that she stayed at her parents' lodge, gradually declining. The baby died of cholera while Crazy Horse was once again harassing the crows. When he got back and learned about this he fell apart. The Oglala camp had moved during his absence and the infant's body had been left on a scaffold now 70 miles away. He rode off to find it. A frontier character named Frank Gruard who lived with the Oglalas for several years, claimed to have accompanied Crazy Horse on this pilgrimage. Gruard is not dependable, at least his biography is not, so the account must be read with suspicion, but Gruard said that Crazy Horse mounted the scaffold, lay down beside his daughter's body, which was wrapped in a buffalo robe, and remained there for 3 days. It sounds like Juana la Loca, the Mad Queen of Spain, who opened her young husband's coffin and tore apart the shroud to kiss his feet. After the death of this little girl, he became indifferent to his own life, taking unreasonable chances, and frequently left the village without revealing what he meant to do. During this period, quite a few solitary miners panning the Black Hills for gold were found dead, but not scalped, each with an arrow driven into the ground beside the corpse. Any wandering Sioux might have killed these men and disdained their scalps, but the presence of that symbolic arrow implies an unusual mind. He always was strange, Black Elk said, and he grew more strange. People would see him outside the village, alone and cold. Once my father found him out alone like that, and he said to my father, "Uncle, you have noticed me the way I act. But do not worry. There are caves and holes for me to live in, and out here the spirits may help me. I am making plans for the good of my people." He was always a queer man. 10 or 12 years after his marriage to Black Shawl, he married a French Cheyenne girl, Nellie Larrivee. Except for No Water's wife, he does not seem to have pursued women. Instead, he seems merely to have accepted them, yielding to their presence. His sister told about seeing a woman enter his lodge and speak to Black Shawl, who was sewing a robe. The side of the lodge had been rolled up because of the heat, which made it possible to listen and watch. Crazy Horse returned while they were talking. The unfamiliar woman met him at the entrance, saying, "I am Joe Laravee's daughter, so I am part white. I have heard about your great deeds, for my father has told us about you and your victory over Long Hair. He says that you are worthy to be the mate of any woman, and though I realize that you already have a wife, I picked this day to offer myself to you for your second mate. I have taken the matter up with your wife and she has consented." He replied that he thought she was sincere, "So bring your belongings and be one of my family." As he grew older, his odd ways became more apparent. He would not smoke a pipe unless each smoker tamped down the tobacco with a thumb, not with a finger. It had to be a thumb. Much of what he did, no matter how peculiar, can be explained. Some things cannot. Captain Bork, who was introduced to him by Frank Gruard in 1877, described him as 5 feet 8 inches tall, lithe and sinewy, with a scar on his face, which must have resulted from No Water's bullet. Bork judged him to be about 30 years old, though in fact he was close to 40. According to an Oglala calendar, he was born the year Left Hand Big Nose was killed by Shoshones, which is to say, 1839. He had made hundreds of friends by his charity towards the poor, as it was a point of honor with him never to keep anything for himself, excepting weapons of war. I never heard an Indian mention his name save in terms of respect. Gruard states that he was light-complexioned, with sandy hair, and did not have the customary high cheekbones of an Indian. Short Buffalo agreed with Gruard's description. The chief was neither tall nor short, not thin yet not broad. His hair and skin were light. He wore an Iroquois shell necklace, but Short Buffalo did not know or chose not to say where Crazy Horse got this distinctive ornament. He also liked to wear a scarlet blanket plucked from a wagon train in 1867. His features were unlike those of most Indians. His face was narrow with a high, sharp nose. He had black eyes that hardly ever looked straight at a man. General Miles called him the embodiment of ferocity, a fierce, restless warrior, who had become the recognized leader of the Oglalas by the time he was 26. There are no authenticated photographs of him. It was said that he did not want to lose himself inside the white man's box. Dr. Valentine McGillicuddy tried several times to get a picture, but Crazy Horse resisted. "My friend," he would answer, "why should you wish to shorten my life by taking from me my shadow? D.F. Barry, was convinced that no photographer caught the elusive chief. He himself photographed Low Dog at Fort Buford in 1881, a picture sometimes misrepresented as being Crazy Horse. And he caught the chief's brother, Wild Horse, who resembled him, but Wild Horse seems to be as close as Barry got. An 1874 photo credited to Major Wilhelm of the 8th Infantry shows a dark-skinned man wearing a huge feather bonnet. From the statements of those who knew Crazy Horse, or at least had seen him, Wilhelm's chief must be somebody else, perhaps Flatiron. An ostentatious bonnet, like the scalp-trimmed shirt, would not be characteristic. Besides, at the time Major Wilhelm supposedly took this picture, his regiment was stationed in Arizona. Wilhelm did not reach Crazy Horse territory until 1890. In the W.H. Over collection at the University of South Dakota, there is a photograph of a remote, angular, light-skinned Sioux with an averted look of distant intensity. This was taken by S.J. Morrow in 1876 or 1877 and has been labeled Crazy Horse. Colonel Graham says Morrow himself labeled it and the photo may be authentic. Other scholars think this might be a portrait of Crazy in the lodge. John Sellover took a picture labeled Crazy Horse and Son, which is remarkably unconvincing for various reasons, such as the fact that Sellover's chief must be 10 or 15 years older than Crazy Horse was at the time of his death. Short Buffalo told Eleanor Hinman about 2 photographs of a man on horseback which he, Short Buffalo, considered authentic. And he said, "I have seen a 3rd photograph that I am sure was he, because it showed him on the pinto horse he rode in the Custer fight. I could not possibly make a mistake about that horse, and nobody rode it but Crazy Horse." The man who owns these pictures got them from soldiers who used to be at Fort Robinson. He has quite a collection of pictures of chiefs. I think he lives out in California now, near the national park there. I do not remember his name. In August of 1876, 2 months after the Little Bighorn, when the Cheyennes and Sioux thought it was time to split up, Sitting Bull led many of his people to Canada where they would be safe from American vengeance, while others slipped away to agencies in order to obtain food from gullible Wisicus. But the strange Oglala refused to leave the land that always had been his home, yet he would not register at an agency, and he spoke with contempt of Indians who negotiated the sale of the Black Hills, saying, "One does not sell the earth upon which the people walk." Red Cloud near the end of his life would be accused of obtuse and unsubduable Indianism. The same must be said of Crazy Horse. Misinterpretation, deliberate or unintentional, brought about his death in 1877. Frank Gruard told General Crook that Crazy Horse would ride north against the whites during the Nez Perce campaign, although the message should have been that he would ride north to assist the whites. Colonel Graham thinks this was an honest mistake, a classic example of erroneous interpretation. However, Dr. McGillicuddy called it a purposeful misinterpretation of his words by Frank Gruard, who had once been a friend of Crazy Horse but was now his enemy and feared him. The trader Louis Bordeaux was present at an earlier conference when Crazy Horse and Lieutenant Philo Clark talked about the Nez Perces. On this occasion, too, Gruard interpreted. Clark asked if Crazy Horse would help fight the Nez Perces. Crazy Horse replied that under certain conditions, which were then enumerated, he and his Oglalas would fight until not one Nez Perce was left, but Gruard told Clark the Oglalas would fight until not a soldier was left. Clark then turned to Louis Bordeaux and asked if this was indeed what Crazy had said. Bordeaux said it was not, and gave his own translation, but was interrupted by Gruard, who called him a liar. Crazy Horse allegedly gave a speech before he died, a long speech. After being bayoneted he had been carried to the post adjutant's office. His blanket was spread on the floor and there for several hours he lay unconscious, bleeding internally. When he awoke he lifted himself on one elbow. According to interpreter Baptiste Poirier, the chief said he had not been hostile to whites. Buffalo supplied his people with food and clothing, and they preferred to chase buffalo rather than live idly at the agencies, arguing with each other and sometimes starving. But the gray fox, Crook, came in midwinter and destroyed their village. Then came Long Hair in the same way. When the Indians first saw Long Hair they wanted to escape but could not, so they were obliged to fight. They fought because the government would not let them alone. Then, said Crazy Horse, he decided to live in peace on the Red Cloud Agency. And at this point he interjected a seemingly irrelevant comment, saying he had taken a half-breed wife. Why did he make such a remark? Perhaps it related to his expressed desire to live amicably with whites, Nellie being half-white. All the same, it is a curious thing for a dying man to mention. He then reiterated that all he ever wanted was to be left alone, and had come to the agency to talk, but white men had tried to imprison him and a soldier had run a bayonet into him. This concluded an odd speech, the authenticity of which has been questioned. Very weakly he began his death song. Indians outside the adjutant's office heard him singing, and almost at once his parents begged to be admitted. Lemley refused, saying he had no authority to let them in, but after Crazy Horse was dead he permitted them to enter. He described them as a wrinkled little old couple. He said they bent over the body of their son, crooning to it, and fondled it as if he had been a broken doll, and they strangely withered pygmies or children. Excerpts from the diary of Agent Jesse Lee seem to indicate that he had no part in the plot to murder Crazy Horse, if there was a plot. Thursday, September 6, 1877. No one can imagine my feelings this morning. I often ask myself, was it treachery or not? To the Indian mind, how will it appear? My part in this transaction is to me a source of torture. Started, Touch the Clouds, and Swift Bear. 2. Spotted Tail, Agency in the ambulance, had a long talk with Gen. Bradley. He did most of the talking. I felt so miserable that I could scarcely say anything. Saturday, September 8, 1877. Everything is quiet and I think will remain so. Crazy Horse's body was brought to this agency and put on a little platform, Indian fashion, on the hill overlooking the post, not half a mile away. Whenever I go out of my quarters I see the red blanket in which his body is wrapped, and thus is recalled to my mind and heart Crazy Horse's pathetic and tragic end. Wednesday, September 12, 1877. I think it was yesterday that I received word from Crazy Horse's father and mother, who were mourning in Indian fashion beside the body of their son, from daylight to dark, that the cattle at night would not disturb his body. They asked me to have a skeleton fence put around his body. So Jack Atkinson and I loaded a spring wagon with a few posts and some rough planks and went up there, and in an hour made a fence. George Hyde, acerbic and patient biographer of the Teton Sioux, sounds baffled by the attention devoted to this renowned chief, whom he considered to be morose, sullen, and rather limited. Says Mr. Hyde, the Crazy Horse cult is amazing. It was evidently started among the Oglalas at Pine Ridge, aided by some white admirers of the Oglala fighting chief. They depict Crazy Horse as the kind of being never seen on earth. A genius in war, yet a lover of peace. A statesman, who apparently never thought of the interests of any human being outside his own camp. A dreamer, a mystic, and a kind of Sioux Christ, who was betrayed in the end by his own disciples, Little Big Man, Touch the Clouds, Big Road, Jumping Shield, and the rest. And he continues rhetorically. One is inclined to ask, what is it all about? Whatever it was about, this quite possibly was the laconic individual, intimidating even to those who knew him all his life, who rode a golden buckskin and settled himself on the valley floor to smoke a pipe and contemplate the bluecoats trapped on the bluff. From their viewpoint high above, Reno's beleaguered men presently observed something as providential as it was unexpected. The tribes dismantled their enormous village and began moving south. Terry and Gibbon were approaching. such is the usual explanation for the departure of these Indians. No doubt there would have been a second battle of the Little Bighorn if the hostiles had stayed where they were, yet they may have left for a different reason. Sitting Bull allegedly wished to spare the lives of Reno's men, and an Oglala messenger named Knife Chief rode around the bluff notifying everybody. If Sitting Bull did indeed call off the attack, it was not because of any affection for whites, whom he hated with abiding and impenetrable rancor, but because he understood how vindictive they could be. If all the soldiers were slaughtered, the whites would insist upon another battle, and another, and another, whereas they might quit molesting Indians if these soldiers were permitted to escape. The story may or may not be true, but what seems rather well documented is the fact that Reno's men would have been allowed to withdraw. If they had retreated in the direction from which they had come, they would not have been pursued. According to David Humphreys Miller, all of the Indians he interviewed were convinced they had shown the soldiers how foolish it was to attack the village, and most of them felt the survivors should be allowed to warn other troops out of the area. Only one thing is certain. Later that afternoon the lodges were packed on travois and a brightly colored horde began to move. Reno's officers studied this movement through field glasses. The entire camp, Unpapa, Brûlé, Miniconjou, Two Kettle, Santee, Oglala, Sans Arcs, Blackfeet, Cheyenne, all of the tribes were flowing southward, with savage dignity, toward the Bighorn Mountains. Thousands of ponies and travois poles lifted a vast cloud of dust. The length of the column was fully equal to that of a large division of the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac, said Reno. Some troopers thought it was 5 miles long. Benteen estimated it at 3 miles long and half a mile wide. They had an advance guard, and platoons formed, and were in as regular military order as a corps or division. One member of H Company, Charles Windolph, recalled many years later. The heavy smoke seemed to lift for a few moments, and there in the valley below we caught glimpses of thousands of Indians on foot and horseback, with their pony herds and travois, dogs and pack animals, and all the trappings of a great camp, slowly moving southward. It was like some biblical exodus. The Israelites moving into Egypt, a mighty tribe on the march. Lieutenant Edgerly felt less poetic. I thought before the ponies commenced to move that it was like a lot of brown underbrush. It was the largest number of quadrupeds I ever saw in my life. It looked as though a heavy carpet was being moved over the ground. Captain Thomas French, who owned a .50 caliber Springfield, and Sergeant John Ryan, who had a 15-pound Sharps equipped with a telescopic sight, spoke the last lines of the Little Bighorn drama. From the hilltop they took long-distance pot shots at the vanishing horde. They did not hit a thing, so far as anybody knows, but this defiant epilogue probably gave the exhausted troops some satisfaction. Interpreter Fred Gerard, trapped in the valley, got a fearfully close look at the spectacle observed by Reno's men through field glasses. Gerard was close enough to see wounded braves on travois, dead men lashed to the backs of ponies, and he could hear the squaws wailing. When this reddish-brown traveling carpet passed almost out of sight, Reno's soldiers ventured down to the river where they drank and filled their canteens. Nobody felt like celebrating, and that night they stayed on the hilltop, moving only a little to get away from the stench. The departure of the Indians could be a massive feint to draw them out of position. Or, they reasoned, the ponies might need more grass, which meant that after the village was relocated the warriors would come back. Major Reno addressed a message to General Terry on the morning of June 27. I have had a most terrific engagement with the hostile Indians. They left their camp last evening at sundown, moving due south in the direction of the Bighorn Mountains. I am very much crippled and cannot possibly pursue. Lieutenants McIntosh and Hodgson and Dr. DeWolf are among the killed. I have many wounded and many horses and mules shot. I have lost both my own horses. I have not seen or heard from Custer. That same morning, just about the time Gerard awoke from his long nap with a mouthful of unswallowed salt pork, Reno's troops saw another dust cloud far to the north. They studied it anxiously, wondering if more Indians had come to join the party, but at last decided the dust was raised by General Crook. This does not seem to make sense. They had been expecting Terry to arrive from that direction, whereas Crook was thought to be somewhere to the south or southeast. But as they looked through field glasses at the approaching cavalry, they did not see any gray horses. Lieutenant Algernon Smith's E Company, which rode with Custer, had been mounted entirely on gray horses. Therefore, if Smith's Gray Horse Company was not part of this column, it must not be Custer, and without doubt Custer would have met Terry somewhere down the valley. After all, that was the plan. So, if this could not be the reunited Terry, Custer army, it must be Crook. Cheer after cheer went up for General Crook as Terry and Gibbon approached. Lieutenant Godfrey remembered a scout arriving with a note dated June 26, addressed to Custer. This scout had been detached on his mission before Terry learned of the disaster and had spent all night trying to sneak around the village. Next came Lieutenant Bradley. Godfrey said to him, "Where is Custer?" Bradley answered, "I don't know, but I suppose he was killed, as we counted 197 dead bodies. I don't suppose any escaped." Benteen asked the same question of General Terry. Terry replied, "To the best of my knowledge and belief he lies on this ridge about 4 miles below here with all of his command killed." Benteen said, "I can hardly believe it. I think he is somewhere down the Bighorn grazing his horses. At the Battle of the Washita he went off and left part of his command, and I think he would do it again." Terry answered that he was mistaken. He told Benteen to go look. Benteen returned from this trip very pale and disturbed. An officer who accompanied him reported that while they stood looking down at the general's naked body, Benteen said, "There he is, God damn him, he will never fight anymore."